What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and I saw this post recently on a Facebook comic group that I'm in. And I thought this was a really interesting one, be a fun one to talk about, especially because I think I'm the one that's going against the grain with pretty much everybody else that seems to be out there, at least that responded in this video. I imagine that might be somewhat of a shock for the people that watch my channel, but I thought that this topic of which would you pick, which would you rather, which would you rather have if you had an opportunity to own one of them? It's something that we always do as collectors when we're looking at books that we want to buy. It's like, unless you have unlimited money or very large amounts of money, you are making decisions of one versus the other when you're picking up books. I'm definitely doing that when I'm talking about my PC books or my keeper books. I am making decisions between this book or that book on which one I can afford, which one I can add to the PC, and then which books maybe I have to sell if I pick one up. It's just something that always comes up in that conversation. I imagine it does for others as well. So let's get into this. I think it's an interesting topic. All right, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So this one caught my attention specifically because one of the books that was being compared was a Amazing Spider-Man 300 9.9. And if you've been watching my channels, I've been talking about 9.9s. And I felt like that added an interesting twist to this conversation. The other thing I thought was pretty interesting about this is that there was a Golden Age book, like a major Golden Age book, major Silver Age book, major Bronze Age book, and then you had a major Copper Age book. And so you had across all eras, and you really get to see what people were interested in, what people might pick up. So let's go check out this post and see what I'm talking about here. So this is the post in the CGC Comics fans group where it said super random mixing of comics, but if you had to choose one to own, which would it be? So number one is a low grade Amazing Fantasy 15. And so for that, I'm saying that that's a 2.0. That's where I'm putting low grade Amazing Fantasy 15. I'm putting that as a 2.0, a good copy, not getting up into the very good range yet. Then we've got an Amazing Spider-Man 300 CGC 9.9. Then we've got a coverless Batman number 1. And then the last one there is a high grade Hulk 181. And again, for this conversation, I'm saying that's a CGC 9.6. So we've got a CGC 2.0 Amazing Fantasy 15, a 9.9 Amazing Spider-Man 300, a coverless, which is a no grade Batman number 1, and then a high grade 9.6 Hulk 181. And so let me know in the comments, which one of these would you end up picking? And I'll talk about a little bit about which one that I would pick from these and why. And we'll go over pricing with these, all that kind of thing. So we're going to scroll down and we're going to look at people's comments first on this, because I'm not surprised by what the answers were, but I think you'll be surprised at what my answer is. So the first one up here, we see coverless Batman 1 all day long. AF-15, not a hard book to find with so many out there. Next one, AF-15, no matter what. Maybe Hulk 181, but value-wise, it's AF-15. Pointless fodder, go away. Amazing Fantasy 15, I'm actually looking to trade for a low grade. If that was a coverless Tech 27, that'd be my first choice, hands down. But since it's Batman 1, I'm going with Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing Fantasy 15. He said it twice even. Amazing Fantasy 15 twice. Another Amazing Fantasy 15, number 4, which is the Hulk 181. Scarcity, this person's going for the Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing Fantasy 15 all day. The Batman, so Batman number 1. Investment-wise, it's number 1, which is the AF-15, but I'm taking it says Wolvie number 4, so the Hulk 181. AF-15, coverless Batman 1. AF-15, coverless Batman 1. This one says a high-grade Tech 27. I don't know which poll they were watching, but not one of the options. Spider-Man every time, which I am assuming they mean the Amazing Fantasy 15, not the ASM 300. Low grade AF-15, AF-15, AF-15. I'm a Spidey guy, but it's coverless Batman 1, another AF-15, and then coverless Batman 1. So you can see on here, I think there are about 25 comments. It looks like I'd say about 15 of them are Amazing Fantasy 15. Maybe 8 of them are Batman 1. And then I think it was about 2 Hulk 181s. That was the breakdown for what people selected for this poll. Nobody picked The Amazing Spider-Man 300, 9.9. But guess which one I'm picking from this poll? I'm picking The Amazing Spider-Man 300, 9.9. And I'll get into why. And it just kind of tells you about how I approach collecting and building up my collection. So this didn't have a caveat because I've seen other polls like this before where it's like caveat that, you have to keep it forever, that kind of thing. This didn't have that. So when I'm looking at these, I'm looking at the value. And that's how I approach building my collection. If like if you see in the books and that kind of thing, some of the books that I have, some that I have in my PC now, like I would not be able to get to that point without buying and selling comics, looking for value to try to then turn it into something bigger. Like that is how I have approached building my collection. From just straight available cash, like those books are they're not viable for me. And, a big chunk of them are not viable for me, but because of, that process that I've gone through over, it's about 5 years now, it's allowed me to be able to get some pretty nice books. And so I would take The Amazing Spider-Man 300, 9.9, because in my opinion, that's the one that has the highest value on this list that I could then sell and buy any of the other books on that list in better condition. So let's start looking at pricing for, why I think that. So we're going to start going from the Golden Age up to the Copper Age. So the first one is Batman #1. So if we look at Batman #1, high grade books are, breaking $1 million for an 8.0. We had a 9.4 go for 2.2 million back in 2021. Then we start getting down to the 0.5s. This is a coverless copy, so it's going to grade as effectively it's going to be an NG, a no grade, but GPA is going to call it a 0.5 over here, but then you see the no grade here in the notes. So we keep going down and we'll find there's a few coverless copies that have sold. This is a book that spiked during the COVID boom and has retreated some, because you can see we had a no grade coverless that sold in August 2022 for 24,000. Here we have a no grade coverless that went as high as 38,400 in 2022, but is now down to 21,000. And this 21,000 copy is very nice. So this is the one that sold for 21,000 for a coverless. This is a great presenting one. You got everything is complete there. Looks good. Compare that to the 0.5 that sold in August of 2022. That was, again, a no grade, but the coverless copy that sold in August of 2022. We can see this one. Look at that. It's missing most of the first page. This is not even a complete coverless copy. And so you can kind of see how the prices have adjusted on this book, how it got very, very expensive and it's still very expensive, but not as much. And so to me, this coverless Batman #1 is probably in the range of 20 to 25,000. I'd say that's where this book is right now. So then we move on to The Amazing Fantasy 15. And so obviously things change if your opinion of a low grade is a 3.0 or a 3.5 or a 1.5 or a 1.0, that changes everything in the conversation. But I put this as a 2.0. And we can see here very recently we had a 2.0, pretty decent presenting 2.0, sold for 19,200. Let's look at some other copies that have sold. So we got Amazing Fantasy #15. And this is definitely the type of book that, depending on how it presents in those lower grades, that can have an impact on the value. But we had a 3.5 that sold. Yeah. A 3.5 that sold here for 25,500. We had another one that sold for 22,200. I think the owner of this one's actually posts on that CGC Comics group all the time because he got an awesome deal picking that book up for 22,200. I'd be posting it all the time too. But you can see here, like 3.5 is down around the low to mid 20s now. This 3.0 was a big sale, but that was back in July. Like price still maybe dropping a little bit. We had this 2.5 in August for 26, which was a big number. But then we've got the 2.0 here, last sale 19, but as low as 15,000 last year. Now let's take a look at that 15,000 if they've got it. There's no picture of it, so I don't know exactly what went on with that one. I do remember there was a really low offer that somebody accepted on eBay, and that might have been either that one or a related book, a similar book. We got a 1.8 for 14.5. I mean, a 2.0, I'd say is about a $20,000 book. I mean, I think 19 to 21,000, somewhere in that range, is pretty reasonable for a 2.0 today. So the Batman #1, we're sitting at like 20 to 24,000, somewhere in that range. The Amazing Fantasy 15, I think we're sitting at like 19 to 21, somewhere in that range. Then we take a look at the Incredible Hulk 181. First full appearance of Wolverine. Here we've got a 9.6 white pages that sold just in September of this year for 19,200. This is a really nice copy. Like, this is a really, really nice looking copy. Pretty solid wrap, only a little bit of a miswrap, and it's on the back, so you don't get the white on the front, which is nice. Pretty square Marvel Comics Group banner up at the top. So, I mean, you can say like this is about what that book would probably sell for, given how big that sale was. But let's go take a look. So, Hulk 181, because I think I remember I thought that one actually went on the higher side, but let's go confirm. And it could be just because that's such a nice looking book. So we've got Hulk 181 and a 9.6. Yeah, so here you see this. We've had as low this year as 16,255, 16.8, 17.9, a couple $19,000 sales recently. I mean, 9.4 is, that's come down quite a bit. You can see it's still trending down. Recent sales in, around 8,000. And so that's the other thing. Like this book, like the Hulk 181, this feels like these last couple sales, they're too high. Like this feels like this book should still be trending down some. It seems like it's still a little too high compared to its pre-COVID prices. Like pre-COVID prices, this is like a $12,000, $13,000 book, somewhere in that range, and still sitting up at 19. That makes me nervous. So far of all of these, the one I absolutely would not get is the Hulk 181. I think it has too much downside risk, and I think it's also just the lowest value book of all of them. I think the Batman #1 in terms of value is the best book so far of the three that we've talked about. And then we've got the Amazing Fantasy 15. So now the last book. Now the tricky part is this one hasn't sold for quite some time. So this is Amazing Spider-Man #300. Now there are 10 9.9s of this book. And this is a book that, if you know Amazing Spider-Man 300, this is the most graded book by CGC. It has the biggest census of any book. So if we take a look at that census, you can see here 30,191 universals, 6,408 signature series, almost 38,000 total graded copies. We get up to a 9.8, there's 1,665 and just 10 9.9s. Now, the interesting thing with the 9.9s is I was looking for pictures of 9.9s because there aren't many available images of a 9.9 of this book out there. And I found an article where I believe it was from like 2018, and it referenced that there were 10 9.9s on census. So even in the last 6 years, a new 9.9 of Amazing Spider-Man 300 has not been added to the census. If I was correct in my memory there. And so definitely a book that there are a ton of them out there. It's one of those that I have been expecting to see another one or two or whatever pop up on census with the 9.9 stuff that we've seen over the last 6 months, 8 months, but we haven't. So there hasn't been a new 9.9. I don't think there's been one for at least 6 years. I don't know when the last one was added. I could probably figure it out if I went and used that CGC data site. I'm not going to. So I did find this sale. So this was in February of 2020, pre-COVID boom. We had a 9.9 old label, and who knows, maybe it's a 10, but I would never send that book back in. That book should stay in that case for all time. We talked about this where the risk of sending a 9.9 back in for reholder, that book should never see the inside of CGC again. But 25,250 pre-COVID. And 9.9s, despite all the stuff going on with them, 9.9s have continued to gain popularity as long as you're not having multiple new copies come out. So those risky books like Wolverine Limited Series #1, Secret Wars 8, we're generally seeing those trend down because so many new 9.9s are showing up on the census. But this is the most popular Copper Age book that hasn't added a new 9.9 in 6 years. And pre-COVID sold for 25,200. So let's take a look at that. We have 2017 went for 13,500. And we know in 2020 it went for that 25,000. If we look at what a 9.8 was going for in 2020, around when this book sold. So this book sold in February of 2020. 9.8, you can see all the books that sell. 9.8 was going around $1,900 to $2,000, somewhere in that range. So this copy sold for about 12 times as much, about 12 times the value for this book. So then, and this is the only way I can really do this with 9.9s. It's generally what I do. You try to use a multiple and see what it sold for previously. And if the price of the 9.8's gone up, then the 9.9 likely went up by a similar multiple. So now if we go up to 2024, where we are right now, we can see it's going around 2,800, 26 to 2,800. Multiply that by 12. Now you're up over 30 grand. I think if a 9.9 Amazing Spider-Man 300 came up for sale today, especially given that we have not had a public GPA on record sale since 2017, and we haven't had at least a public sale that I've been able to find since this one in 2020, I think that there's going to be some pretty serious pent-up demand for this book. And I think if you got that book, you could probably sell it even at auction for 35,000. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. And if it got higher, it would not shock me at all. I think that this could easily be a $35,000 to $40,000 book in a 9.9. And personally, I'd probably be selling it just out of fear that a 10.0 might show up. And I don't know if that would hurt the value of this book because then you're no longer top of census. But that's how I approach this. So we've got Batman #1 is, what did I say? 21 to 24,000. We've got Amazing Fantasy 15 is like 19 to 21,000. Hulk 181 sold for 19 here, but probably more like 16 or 17 and still trending down. And then Amazing Spider-Man 300 9.9, I think 35,000. And I think even on a bad day, this is a $30,000 book. So I'd take this book, I'd sell it, and I'd probably buy a higher grade Amazing Fantasy 15 because that's the one that ultimately I would want. If I want a Batman 1, I'm going to want one that has a cover on it. I know if I got a coverless Batman #1, it would not end up being a book that I wanted to keep. I would just lose interest in it. I mean, I think it's really cool, but I know myself. I know how I'd feel on it, and I know I would lose interest in it, but I would want the cover on it. And for a cover copy, even on the low end, you're 45, 50 grand. And so none of these get to that price point. But the Amazing Fantasy 15, I mean, what can we get for our, maybe 35,000? We got to pay fees and stuff. We'll say 35,000 for that, that Amazing Fantasy 15. I mean, going down to probably, look here, a 4.5, 31,200, 4.0, 31,200. A 5.0 hits the 40,000. Probably can't get into a 5.0, but you can probably get into a 4 or a 4.5 of Amazing Fantasy 15 without too much trouble by taking that ASM 300, turn it into that higher grade Amazing Fantasy 15. So that's how that's kind of a window into how I approach this, this hobby and how I build up my collection and try to get, bigger and better books. As part of that, I just figured at the end of this, I would just show a book that I just recently picked up. And it was one that I had originally and I sold it. And then I got the opportunity to pick it back up. And I'll say, of all the books that I have sold from my PC, because this is one of my PC books. I did not even have it for sale when I sold it, but person reached out to me and I posted it on Instagram, and I know them, and they were interested, and I decided to sell it to them. The opportunity came for me to get it back. I jumped on it, and if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen this one, but man, I love this book. The crazy thing is, just about 2 weeks ago, I was thinking about this book, and I was like, man, I wish I had that book back. And then I guess I brought it into the world. I made this happen. No, I'm just kidding. But no, so this is Black Cat, number 50, classic Lee Elias cover, and a 9.0 file copy. I mean, this book is so killer. Like, it is stunning. And this is one of those books that, and I think I said this when I originally had bought this book. And I mean, it is the exact same copy. Like, so it is the exact same copy that I sold. When I originally bought this book, this was not a cover I was ever really going after. I was like, the opportunity came to get a 9.0, and I was like, how often you get that chance? And so I grabbed it. And when I got this book in person, this is one of those books that changed my opinion on the book when I saw it in person. I've had that happen with some other books as well, like Batman number 11, the Joker cover. That was the exact opposite. I had thought I wanted that book, and I saw it in person, and I didn't like it anymore in person. Mass Comics number 1. I had thought I wanted a Mass Comics number 2, and then I saw issue 1 and 2 next to each other together, and I was like, 1 is the book. And so I picked up the Mass Comics 1. And so sometimes you don't really know how much you're going to like a book when you see it on screen or, on a video or whatever. But when you get it in person, it can really change your perception of that book. And for this one, I think it's the detail. The level of detail on that book is incredible. And so that was the one that, man, I'm so excited to be able to get that book back. But that's an example of a book that, I mean, just normally that is not a book I'm ever able to own. But because I'm always out there looking for the, the equivalent of this Amazing Spider-Man 300 and trying to turn it into something else, I'm able to have an incredible Golden Age, just killer grail like that. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments, what would you do? Like if you're never going to sell a book, then, it's a different story. Maybe you pick the Amazing Fantasy 15 or the Batman, number 1 coverless, or, but for me, because I'm always looking for how can I upgrade my collection? What can I add to my collection? That's the thing that I'm always considering when I'm buying and selling books. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and I will see you on the next one.